Hello from Westmount Airy, Philadelphia. This is Jessica Dore. I'm going to be reading the August 2019 Tarot Offering. And if you're new to the Tarot Offering or you're new to this audio, this is a monthly thing that I do. I pull 6 tarot cards and I write something about them. I sort of try to tie them all together in some way. It's a creative practice for me. It's a love offering for people who follow my work, or who may be new to my work, or who may be yet to know about my work. And yeah, as usual, I am interpreting the tarot cards through the lens of behavioral science and psychology, and sort of informed by my work in the mental health field. So I will be sort of just reading the offering. It's a written piece that I've already sent out to my email list, which I usually do at the end of the month. And then for those who are not on the email list, I publish the offering on my website along with this audio, which you're listening to now. If you're interested in being among the first to receive the text version of the offering, you can sign up at jessicadore.com/sign up. Otherwise, yeah, you can just kind of check the website at the beginning of the month. Somewhere in the first week, usually, is when I've been posting these and sharing the audio version. So I'm going to basically read it, and I'll add a little bit of an embellishment, and I will do my best to also include some descriptions of the cards that I'm talking about. So for the offering this month, the cards that I pulled were the Fool, the Emperor, the Eight of Swords, the Three of Cups, the Three of Pentacles, and the Page of Pentacles. So I'm going to kind of, I guess, describe them as I go through, as they come up in the offering. So I began this month's offering by just sharing briefly that there was a critic who recently told me that my interpretation of one of the major arcana was not in line with the classical meanings, which were sort of laid out by some of the men who assigned meanings to them in the early 20th century. Aleister Crowley, Arthur Waite. This really got me thinking about tradition and rules and rule breaking as they relate to change and evolution and growth. And because the work that I do is always concerned with both the external and internal, I decided to dig into some of the science around rules and how they play out sort of in the internal domain, and how I've understood that over the years. So sort of looking at rules from like a larger, more macro social perspective in terms of traditions and systems and kind of, culture, how things change, how things stay the same. And then also looking at rules as they apply to internal life and, smaller, more micro manifestations of rules and rule following and rule breaking. Rules help us create structure in our lives, and can be part of how we derive our sense of personal power. And here I'm referring to the Emperor, which in the illustration, there is a person sitting in a sort of concrete looking throne. It's very kind of rigid and stiff looking, and the person is wearing armor and red. They're draped in red, and this card I always think about as being about personal power, but also about rules and boundaries and things of that nature and structure. So rules help us create structure in our lives, but when they're not regularly interrogated and updated as needed, they become liabilities. This is true in every domain, from mental health to social welfare. So like I was saying, looking at kind of the internal manifestations of that, but also the external. Catholic Benedictine monk David Steindl-Rast wrote, "Although life creates structures, structures do not create life." And this is why the Tower is so high up in the major arcana sequence. It represents the destruction of old and heralding of the new, which makes way for new life and understanding. And this is kind of understood to be a really important part of the emergence of new life, new things to come. There has to be some destruction of the old. The tower, by the way, is not in this month's spread, but this is just a reference to that idea and that concept. It's summer here, and that also gets me thinking that just 6 months ago, it was so cold I couldn't even leave the house. The only reason I can even sit here with the windows open and the hot sun on my face is because spring had the audacity to interrupt the stiff, hard shell of winter. A frozen, dead thing that left to its own devices would probably have stayed forever had it not been interrupted by spring. There are things in life that are like winters too. Dead things that things that feel dead and stiff, habits, patterns, ways of life that we become fused with, beliefs, ideologies, systems that we don't challenge. Some tarot scholars have written about the Fool as being the embodiment of spring, the green man, the April Fool, the human manifestation of a melting icicle, or the first green tips of a daffodil. What audacity these things have to interrupt a gigantic frozen landscape. What audacity a melting icicle has, or, the first green tips of a daffodil to like poke through the soil. That's the energy of the Fool, and I think that's really powerful stuff. Breaking rules is necessary because rules that are followed for too long and without questioning become habits, and habits become invisible very quickly. I'm sort of referring here to the Eight of Swords. I think this person who's standing out in this, looks like a sort of marsh, and they're tied up around, their upper body is tied up. They have a blindfold on, and they're surrounded by swords. And there's a castle behind them in the distance that they're sort of unable to get to because they're out here stuck, or they believe that they're stuck. The swords surrounding them are kind of representing all these rules and habits that they're invisible, but they are very real in the impacts that they have on this person and their stuckness. Habits become invisible very quickly. In the behavioral science field, the term rule-governed behavior is used to describe things that people do, not because those things are the good or right or values-driven things, but because they've become habit based on some psychological rule that may or may not be rooted in truth and may or may not be useful. For example, a person who hears voices or sees things that other people don't see might have a rule that says people who hear voices or see things that other people don't see can't possibly live a vital, fulfilling life. As a result of this rule, such a person may avoid seeking help because to them, seeking help means accepting something about their brain that they believe means will require them to live a broken shell of a life. So this rule that, people who have this particular experience can't live a meaningful life, it's an invisible rule, but it prohibits this person from getting treatment or help or something that would really benefit them because they are following this rule without interrogating it. In fact, a huge number of people who experience psychosis or who experience, auditory or visual hallucinations or olfactory hallucinations live deeply meaningful and fulfilling lives. A person who has a rule that says feeling good is the goal of life, therefore feeling bad means I have failed, will do whatever they can do to avoid feeling bad. And I probably don't need to tell you the myriad ways that rule is going to cost them a fortune, or cost you a fortune, if that's a rule that sounds familiar to you. And again, here I'm kind of referring to the Eight of Swords. If feeling good is the goal of life, and making contact with any of these swords, any of these sort of like prickly things that surround me, whether that sword is social anxiety or guilt or grief, if feeling good is the goal of life, then I can't allow myself to feel those things under any circumstances. And when I live my life according to that rule, my life becomes smaller and smaller because there's so many things that I'm not willing to feel. there's value in both convention and innovation. I don't want to say that every rule needs to be broken and we should throw out all of our systems and traditions. Not at all. In rule following and rule breaking, there's something of value, I think. Some people are really good at memorization, recall, adherence, and tradition. There's people who are really, really good at that. And these people are needed because they are the preservers of history and the culture bearers. They teach us what's come before. It's important that we have access to this information, that we remember. Others are more skilled at forgetting, which might sound foolish to you, but in the world of archetypes, the fool is sacred. Forgetting makes innovation and the bridging of worlds possible. If no one ever forgot the rules, there would be no new systems to memorize, no new customs to honor, traditions to keep with, strings to the past to tie around our waists as we swim out to explore new domains. Forgetting is also a skill in some ways. Like, imagine forgetting all the wrong things you learned about your levels of lovability, your worth, your adequacy, your competence as a child. Imagine forgetting the deficiencies that you're sure deep down and at the cellular ancestral level that you have. Imagine forgetting these deficiencies that you're sure you have. Imagine forgetting heteronormativity and the gender binary and all the conditioning, the rules and standards, the socialization. Imagine forgetting European standards of beauty. Imagine if all the oppressive rules you've internalized suddenly slipped your mind or returned back to sender, never to return. Maybe you've felt that before, that forgetting in tiny fleeting moments with beings you felt safe with. Here I'm referring to the Three of Cups, where it shows three people dancing in a circle. They're sort of holding each other up. There's celebration and freedom and joy, connection and intimacy. Maybe you've felt that before, those moments where you forget all that stuff about who you're not, things you've been taught about yourself that aren't true. Maybe you're holding out for a time like that to bless you for the very first time, a time where you feel free from all of these things that you've learned that don't really serve you. What sweet, sacred, wild, and unbridled energy. This is the essence of the fool. That forgetting, inadequacy. If you've identified some rules that you don't think are working and you'd like to break them, you should know how to break rules well. It won't be enough to go around rebelling willy-nilly for the sake of ruffling feathers or being weird, because all of that centers the thing that you're rebelling against, and that's not the point. You need a vision, a quest that has nothing to do with what's happening already and everything to do with what's precious. Three of Pentacles paired with the Fool reminds me of the unique and peculiar thing that happens when a person is grounding so deep into their haunches that the energy has nowhere to go but up. Threes are always about innovation because they speak to what happens when two energies meet and something new comes out of that confluence. If no one broke rules, there would be no new fields, no new systems, no new ideas, no new areas of study, and that would make life no longer living. I don't know about you, but I think I can do better work in this world if I don't have to haul the stiff corpse of the past around with me forevermore. I'd rather it go deep into the ground where something fresh and alive can grow in its rich soil. Here's a practice for connecting with the Three of Pentacles, because all of this has been pretty heady, I think. Write down each of the things you're good at on little pieces of paper. Don't worry about making them cohesive or related. In fact, I even think the more random they seem, the better. The more like disconnected and like not relevant to one another they seem, that might even be better for this activity. Put them in a hat and pull three. So all your little pieces of paper with the things that you're good at, put them in a hat, pull three. Using the three skills that you've pulled, come up with a project that lets you use them all. If you have a partner or collaborator, you can also do this together. Let skills go together that buck what you thought you could blend. You might be really used to sort of like putting certain things together, using certain skills in the same context. You might have rules around the skills that you can use in this space or that space. What if you could bring a skill from a space that you don't think about into another space? That's kind of the idea here. This is one solid practice for breaking rules well. And I encourage you to come up with your own practices for breaking rules well as well. Tension can sometimes look like stuckness when it's actually a clearing. At the internal level, tension happens when one or more parts of us are in conflict, or at least not on the same page. Seeking to have their own unique needs met, each part vies for executive leadership. But when no one part is convincing enough, a stalemate is reached. You know you're stuck and you know you're not a statue, but you don't know yet what to do about it. This is good. It's so good. It's so good because it means you're passing through a stage that every other person who has ultimately altered their physical reality or made a significant life change has passed through. I'm referring to the Page of Pentacles here, which shows a person holding up a pentacle and looking at it. This card, for me, thinks about being in the stages of contemplation when you're thinking about making a change. You're recognizing that change needs to be made. Everyone you can think of who has made great change has been where you are now. You're perfectly poised to identify the rules that are keeping you bound, and soon you'll be ready to start breaking them. Get to what's precious and then look at what's oppressing that. Protest, lobby, draft new rules, organize, enlist supporters. Take your freedom by force if you have to. I recently wrote about how naming something a block or a problem is a protest in itself. A statement that you're not fine with being oppressed in this particular way, and no, you most certainly did not plan to shape a life around some limitation that really doesn't need to be there. Give credit where credit is due. You can call yourself stuck if you want to, but maybe you can amend the rule that says stuckness is bad, so that it says stuckness is just one step away from a breakthrough. And that is the August 2019 Tarot offering. I'm Jessica Dore. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting this work. It really means a lot to me. And I am wishing you a gentle and easeful and stimulating and interesting August.